Your favorite half-hour happy time has arrived once again. My name is Eric, and I'm your host for another exciting episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. This is a flagship of the paperbackwarrior.com blog where you can find the prior 118 episodes and links to hundreds of videos about vintage fiction. You can also browse thousands of posts and reviews about vintage books, comics, pulp magazines, and authors, including affiliate links to buy the books we're covering. Feel free to donate to the show on the desktop version, top right-hand corner. There's also Paperback Warrior mugs and puzzles for sale there as well, created by yours truly. Cheers to superfans like David Kowalski, Ida Umphers, Bob Dice, James Sear, Pete Roble, KR Training, for donating every single month. Also, kudos to communications I receive from listeners and fans like Robert Culp, Tim DeForest, Greg Hersom, Greg Salas, Tommy Hyland, Graham Donald. There's so many, and I just can't thank you enough for being a part of Paperback Warrior. Also, thanks to fellow booktubers Nick Anderson of the Book Graveyard and Brian of Bad Taste Books for joining me last month for a book review on YouTube. That was a lot of fun. Also, thanks to Paperback Warrior alumni Tom Simon. He still chimes in with written reviews every month. He still chats with me from time to time to let me know what he's reading or sometimes even watching. I vent sometimes to him about certain books or authors or just personal life in general, and he's just a great guy. You can follow him on simoninvestigations.com with links to daily videos about his eventful career in the FBI and his booming private eye business. I hope listeners enjoyed my last two podcast appearances. These were special conversation episodes I did with Starkhouse Press founder and editor Greg Shepard, as well as award-winning podcaster, author, and editor Paul Bishop. Those can be found in the same places you found this very episode. You can also find those episodes at paperbackwarrior.com or on the PW YouTube channel. Also, I hope you're enjoying all the shorts I've been posting of late. I try to put up one short video. These are less than 1 minute in length of a book review or just a short author biography. Keep an eye out for those, and as long as people are watching them, I'm going to try to continue to focus on those. I'm trying to put up one a day. All right, so today's episode is a feature on a pretty cool little paperback franchise that ran from the late 1970s through the early 1990s. That franchise is known as the Amityville Horror books, but I'm unabashedly titling them Amityville Paperbacks from Hell. There's roughly a dozen or more Amityville installments, and I've spent most of this month digging deep into those books, the events surrounding these volumes, and just digesting everything I can to present this feature to the best of my ability and time commitments. I hope you enjoy it. I'm also going to review a few of those books as part of this episode as well. My main review of this episode is a review with a similar theme. It's Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House from 2023. I thought it would be fun to kind of link that in. But first, I want to tell you about some new books that are coming out this month. Let me grab my short list here. First up is Black Gat book number 70. It's called The Wicked Streets by Wenzel Brown. This was originally published by Fawcett Gold Medal back in 1957. It's now reprinted in a new edition with a really cool retro-style cover. The book's about a drug dealer named Buzz who's dating a woman named Diane at a jazz club. Buzz's problem is that a former Blade named Nucci gets out of jail and comes gunning for him in a quest for revenge. Buzz got Nucci busted, and now Nucci wants Buzz's life and his territory. Sounds promising. Again, this is Wicked Streets by Wenzel Brown, out now on Black Gat Books, an imprint of Starkhouse Press. Another Starkhouse Press book out this month is a Lionel White twofer. This volume features White's 1968 novel, The Crime-Noir Memorandum, which promises the story of an accidental death that is more than it seems. The second book in that volume is Hijack, originally published in 1969. The synopsis reads, "She was totally without inhibitions. All she wanted was to awaken him and to please him, and her soft lips and knowledgeable hands knew exactly what to do. Later, he said, 'You have done something wonderful for me. Now, what can your doctor do for you?' She said she wanted $12 million, and so he conceived an incredible, deadly plan to get it for her. Again, this is Lionel White's The Crime-Noir Memorandum and Hijack, 2-in-1 book. It's out now through Starkhouse Press. As I alluded to earlier, I had author, editor, and podcaster Paul Bishop on last week to discuss his new book. It's called 52 Weeks, 52 Sherlock Holmes Novels. This is available in digital, trade paperback editions, and a limited hardcover with bonus content. The synopsis reads, "More than just a year's worth of Sherlock-related reading, 52 Weeks, 52 Sherlock Holmes Novels is a multi-personal look at 52 of the best Sherlockian pastiches. Each of the invited contributors, ranging from Sherlockian scholars to passionate devotees, have gone beyond the simple facts of plots and authors to give readers their personal insight or connection to their chosen novel. In 52 Weeks, 52 Sherlock Holmes Novels, fans of the world's greatest detective, be they expert or novice, will find refreshingly original observations on established favorites, as well as new contributions to the endlessly expanding Sherlockian universe. So settle in with whatever your version is of a comfortable armchair, a roaring fire, and a clay pipe filled with shag tobacco from a Persian slipper, and lose yourself in the unique journey of 52 Weeks, 52 Sherlock Holmes Novels, and it's out now, so be sure to get it. In other news, I posted a short reel on YouTube and Facebook earlier this month about the classic Western paperback Flint, written by Louis L'Amour. A fan named Kevin had responded on Facebook with the news that Flint's being adapted to film, and I wanted to pass that along here because, man, that book has its share of fans, and I'm one of them. The movie will star Josh Holloway as James Kettleman. Ryan Whitaker is the writer and director of the film, and I'm hopeful that this will turn out to be a great adaptation. Whitaker has dabbled in the Christian film and book market, so hopefully this movie will get like a PG or PG-13 rating and be void of, like 50 F-bombs per hour like most of Hollywood drivel these days. So let's keep an eye out on this one and see how it works out. All right, so we've got a lot to tackle in today's episode. This feature is going to be really exciting. How about I hit that warm tune you've grown to love, and then I'll be right back here with today's feature. Here we go. All right, today's feature is on a series of books that were labeled as both nonfiction works and also horror fiction and published between the late 1970s and early 1990s. The books get a mention in Grady Hendrix's mesmerizing Paperbacks from Hell, and these Amityville books, they really elevated the subgenre of haunted house horror in horror fiction by the 1980s, and these books are about some paranormal incidents that occurred at a house in Amityville on Long Island in New York and helped to create and solidify a Hollywood film franchise led by the adaptation of Jay Anson's book, The Amityville Horror. I'm going to get into all that. I'm going to take you through this whole thing so you can understand how the books began, what they're based on, who wrote them, and so forth. I'm going to warn you ahead of time, though. There's some somewhat graphic material in this feature in terms of true crime murder. Mostly we try to stay on the fictional path here at Paperback Warrior, but we're going to talk about some actual crimes and pretty grisly stuff, but nothing you probably haven't seen or heard before on a primetime episode of Law & Order, but I just want to throw that out there. So let's go ahead and rewind back in time to Wednesday, November 13th, 1974. The location is 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. A Dutch colonial 3-story home, 4,000 square feet, sitting by the Amityville River. This home belongs to Ronald DeFeo Sr., his wife Louise, and children Dawn, Allison, Mark, John, and Ronald DeFeo Jr. This night, again November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. goes through the house and he shoots each family member as they lay sleeping in bed. He used a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. He then goes to a local bar down the street and asks for help. He claims that someone has broken into the home and killed his parents. The police are called, they went in the house, they locate the bodies. Now initially, DeFeo Jr. says that a guy named Mr. M came into the home and committed the murders. Later, he would claim a mob hitman named Louis Fellini executed his family based on the beef he had with DeFeo's father. None of these things were found believable during the trial. Fellini was out of town that night. There was no Mr. M. DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, he copped an insanity plea, and it was stated that DeFeo heard voices in the house telling him to murder his family. Ultimately, DeFeo was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder and spent the rest of his life in prison. He died on March 12, 2021 of unknown causes at the age of 69. Throughout his incarceration, he continually changed his story. At one point, he claimed his sister Dawn helped facilitate the murders with her 2 friends. He later claimed he was even married to a woman named Geraldine Gates at the time of the murders, but that was proven false. Sometimes he would say the only demon in the house was just himself. This brings us to the very first book I recommend in what I refer to as this Amityville publishing universe, I guess, so to speak. This first book that I recommend you read is called High Hopes: The Amityville Murders. It's authored by Gerard Sullivan and Harvey Aronson, and it was published in 1981. Granted, this book comes after the legendary bestseller The Amityville Horror, which we're going to talk about, but this is the best place to start. This book is a true crime nonfiction book. It's about 350 pages, and it goes through the entire murder investigation, the trial, the fallout. It digs into the family history. There's no ghosts, there's no goblins, no demons, no horror stuff here other than just, real life, everyday terror of humans doing awful things to other human beings, but that's just what this book's about. It's about the murders of the DeFeos, and it digs into all that. Again, it's called High Hopes: The Amityville Murders by Gerard Sullivan and Harvey Aronson, published in 1981. Now, you can then piggyback off of that book by jumping into the 2006 paperback titled The Night the DeFeos Died, written by Rick Asuna. He spent 3 years researching the case and supposedly interviewed DeFeo, although DeFeo would later deny that he ever spent any time with Osuna. But for the murders themselves and the DeFeo family, read High Hopes: The Amityville Murders, and then jump into this one, which is called The Night the DeFeos Died, again by Rick Osuna. Another contemporary book that looks closely at the DeFeo murders is Will Savive's Mentally Ill in Amityville, which was published in hardcover in 2008. I haven't read this one, but this is a good investigative piece into the murders. Now, if you absolutely must have one additional book about the murders, now, I've already presented 3 of them to you here, but if you need another book, you can also read Murder in Amityville by Hans Holzer. This was published in paperback in 1979, and it goes through the murder investigation and the trial. This book, it's out there. It's really out there. This book suggests that DeFeo was possibly possessed by some sort of entity in the house when he committed the murders. And I heard the book isn't very good. Again, the title is Murder in Amityville by Hans Holzer. All right, so let's jump from the DeFeo murders and those 4 books. We'll jump from the DeFeo murders in 1974. We're going to jump to July 1975. So we're plotting forward here. George and Kathy Lutz are shopping for a home because they just got married. George, who had no children of his own at the time, had his own house that needed to be sold. Kathy, she's divorced. She's got 3 children of her own: Daniel, age 9, Christopher, age 7, Melissa, age 5. And Kathy also had a house that she needed to sell. So the 2 of them had a real estate issue, and they needed to sell property and buy a house together to get everybody together as a family. So they go to 112 Ocean Avenue, and they tour the DeFeo home and realize the price is something like $90,000. George is thinking the price of the home should be upwards into the $120,000 price range. But they tour the home, they like it, they meet with the realtor afterwards, and the realtor explains the deal. She says, hey, look, this is where the DeFeos were murdered. This is the house. The Lutzes discuss it. They're okay with it. Obviously, they're okay with the price because it's drastically reduced. The kids are okay with it. They offer $80,000, and they get the house, and they move in. 28 days later, they leave the house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They leave all their belongings behind, and they flee to Kathy's mother's house. What in the world is going on? Well, the reason is, supposedly, the house was haunted. That's what they say. I've always been pretty fascinated with the Lutz's accounts over the years. This is something I've followed as sort of like a hobby. They maintain that all of these crazy paranormal things legitimately happened to them. They maintained their story their entire lives. In researching this podcast episode, I wanted to hear George Lutz's actual account from his mouth, his words, all of it. Now, George, he died in 2006, but in 2002, he was interviewed by Coast to Coast AM broadcaster Art Bell. You can download that from archive.org, and it's also streaming on YouTube as well. I listened to it. I think I've listened to this before. I'm pretty sure I have, but I wanted to listen to it right before I did this episode. George claims that his wife, Kathy's face morphed into that of a 90-year-old woman twice, and it took hours for the transformation to reverse itself. He claims that his wife levitated from the bed twice. He said he did as well one time. He stated that sludgy slime was leaking all over the house, and that these old keyholes in the doors — remember, this is an older house with those old-style doors that had little keyholes — um, which used a skeleton key, they would leak out a type of ooze from those keyholes. He said the house wouldn't want them to leave, that it constantly kept them there. He claimed that something malevolent lived in the sewing room, and that swarms of flies would gather in the window, despite it being, winter. He claims that the house slammed a window on Daniel's hands, literally flattening them, but within a few minutes, it was like the incident never happened. The dog wouldn't go into certain rooms. Now, Art does ask George if he ever felt like something in the house was motivating him to do physical harm either to himself or other members of the family, and he wouldn't really answer that question, but he says that he used humor as a way to fight these urges. So I'm thinking that maybe something did, but who knows? One of the key people in the Lutz's account is that of Father Ralph J. Pecoraro. George and Kathy had a prior relationship with Father Ralph, especially George. He had gotten an annulment from his prior marriage through the Catholic Church, and he used Father Ralph to do that. He had maintained a friendship with the priest that was mostly by phone. In Art Bell's interview, George says that Father Ralph came and blessed the house prior to them moving in, and he had asked George specific questions about the sewing room and if it was going to be used as a bedroom. Father Ralph said he didn't have a good feeling in that particular room. Father Ralph admits to going to the home and being slapped by an unknown force. He says these things in the 1979 episode of In Search Of, which was hosted by Leonard Nimoy. Later, Father Ralph, perhaps urged by the Catholic Church, denies ever going to the house and claims he only communicated with the Lutzes by phone, and then he later sued a publisher over distorting his involvement. So the Lutzes, they move out of the house, they leave all their stuff behind. They're living at Kathy's mother's house. George, he wants to get the house fixed so they can eventually return. Various paranormal investigators go into the home, including Ed and Lorraine Warren, on March 6, 1976. And their investigation concludes that the house is haunted, for whatever that's worth. The Lutzes each took a polygraph test, administered by what many consider to be one of the best in the field at the time, Chris Gugas, and they passed, for what that's worth. All right, so let's get back to the books. The Lutzes put their account down on 30-plus hours of audio tape in an effort of self-therapy. They explain everything that happened to them during this 28-day period. They put it all on tape. The defense attorney for Ronald DeFeo Jr., he shows back up in our story here. William Weber, again, this was Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney of all things. He shows up to act as a type of literary agent and wants to transform the Lutz's ordeal into a book. He claims that he and the Lutzes drank a bunch of wine and came up with this whole haunting idea to make money. But George Lutz said on the Art Bell interview that Weber pitched this crazy book idea in a scheme to get the house and some other legal property, and that nothing good was ever going to come of it. The Lutzes sue Weber, and he countersues the Lutzes for $2 million for falling out of a book deal. A New York judge named Weinstein throws the whole thing out. The Lutzes, wanting to get on with their lives, said that the publisher, Prentice Hall, could have access to the 30-plus hours of audio tape they recorded. So they say, hey, you know what? We don't want to have anything to do with this book. We'll give you the 30-plus hours of audio tape that we recorded. You can give it to whoever you want to write a book about it, and that's it. So Prentice Hall takes the 30 hours of audio tape, and they give it to an author named Jay Anson. They hire him to do this book. The Lutzes refuse to meet with the author. They just say, hey, our testimony or whatever is on the 30-plus hours. You can listen to that. So the publisher comes up with Jay Anson, who had previously never had a book published. Jay Anson listened to the tapes and put his imaginary vision to work. The Amityville Horror was published in September of 1977, and it became a sensation. The title was influenced by H.P. Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror. According to the Lutzes, Jay Anson embellished their account considerably and added quite a bit of fiction to it. What they experienced in the house wasn't the same thing that Anson typed for his book. This is something Anson would admit to. Now, Anson himself died in 1980 after complications from a heart surgery. He was only 58 when he died, and he only managed to write one other book, which was a haunted house horror novel titled 666. Now, I read the Amityville Horror a couple times when I was younger. I really love the book as a work of fiction. It's written in this deadpan style with short sentences and very little character interaction. It's almost like a play-by-play of horror craziness, mostly highlighted by young Melissa's demonic imaginary friend. It's this pig-looking apparition calling itself Jody. In the book, George Lutz can't keep warm, and he slowly begins to transform into a madman that could physically harm his family. He's also obsessed with a secret closet or room in the basement referred to as the Red Room. Again, this is all stuff that the Lutzes didn't actually experience. I'd say Anson's horror tale is truly more terrifying than anything the Lutzes could experience, but we're never going to know. But again, the book to read next is The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. It's a riveting horror read, in my opinion. The Amityville Horror book was, of course, adapted into the film of the same name in 1979, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder. I'll circle back to the movies at the end of this feature just to give you a short trip through the movie franchise. The Lutzes, through all this legal mumbo-jumbo, they said they cleared about $300,000 out of the whole book deal and movie stuff. That's after paying attorneys, eating a loss on the house, and so forth. George Lutz claimed Anson himself made $2 million. Then you have the studio and publisher making money. The Lutzes claimed that anyone saying they were in this for the money was way off because there wasn't anything here to gain. The Lutzes were also careful to secure the rights to any sequel to Amityville Horror. They wanted to be sure that the movies stopped there. They owned the rights to anything that would be titled the Amityville Horror 2 or Part 2, so there was never any proper sequel involving the Lutz family. They didn't want to continue to present this house to the world. They kind of just wanted it to end at the Amityville Horror with their accountant, and that was it. Now we get into the paperback fictional world of Amityville. The next book you'll want to read is The Amityville Horror Part 2 by John G. Jones. Now, you just heard me say earlier that the Lutzes secured the rights to anything titled Amityville Horror Part 2 or 2. That's right, because they did authorize this book. It was published by Warner in 1982. John G. Jones sort of tries to make this a nonfiction book that tells about the Lutzes taking the polygraph test, moving out of Kathy's mother's home and into their own place. It tackles the Lutzes' book tour in places like Europe. It goes over an exorcism that the Lutzes had performed on themselves because they were still experiencing some minor paranormal things. When I say performed on themselves, I mean they used a priest, but they had voluntarily wanted to do this exorcism. It's a book that really struggles to keep an active pace for 377 pages. There just isn't that much happening here beyond just day-to-day stuff. Now, Jones, I believe, with the hesitant agreement of Kathy, paired up with George to write some fiction and added some horror elements to the book, including the reappearance of this pig thing apparition that Melissa befriended named Jody. George alluded to the idea that fiction could help other people dealing with paranormal stuff. This was a position that Kathy didn't apparently take. So the Amityville Horror Part 2, again authored by John G. Jones, can probably be skipped unless you're just a completist and want to read all the Amityville stuff. Then you can read this. But again, it's mostly nonfiction stuff about them going through a book tour and taking polygraph tests and so forth, with a little bit of fiction added in just to make it entertaining. Another book that would come next that you can probably skip, honestly, is Amityville, The Final Chapter. This was published in 1985 by Jove, and once again, this was authored by John G. Jones. This is more nonsense that follows the Lutzes doing promotional stuff. There's a horror fiction element added like in Amityville Horror Part 2, and this one, George and Kathy are leaving the kids with a nanny, and the nanny's mother's always over visiting. They're experiencing paranormal stuff. Again, this is straight up fiction just for entertainment purposes. The Lutzes become just fictional characters in this book. It's Amityville, The Final Chapter by John G. Jones, and you can absolutely skip this one. It's not even remotely interesting. And I honestly don't even know if the Lutzes signed off on this book or not. I'm not sure. I read it. I hated the book. The next book that would make sense reading is Amityville, The Horror Returns. This was published in 1999 and authored by Jones. This one follows the Lutzes right after the stuff that occurs to them in the final chapter. Again, this is completely a work of fiction. None of this happened. The author is just using the Lutzes as characters in his fictional Amityville universe. In this one, the Lutzes move to Oregon, and the paranormal stuff follows them there, including the crazy Jody pig thing. At one point, the home in Oregon actually physically transforms into the Amityville house. I remember reading it back in the day, and I don't remember if I ever finished it. It didn't do much for me. But again, it's Amityville, The Horror Returns by John G. Jones. The next book to consider reading is Amityville: The Evil Escapes. This was published in 1988, and once again, it's authored by John Jones. This is a horror novel, a work of fiction. It's about a yard sale that occurs selling the items that the Lutzes had at the Amityville house when they left, and also some of the furniture that was there when the DeFeos occupied the home. Again, complete fiction. The book explores the neighbors in the town that buy items and then carry them home and experience demonic forces there, all tied to the cursed furniture. This was pretty fun. It's a light read with some spooky stuff. The church is involved trying to protect these people. It was a lot of fun, honestly. Again, it's the Amityville, it's Amityville: The Evil Escapes by John G. Jones. Similar to this book is another book titled Amityville: The Nightmare Continues. This was authored by R. Carl Largent using the pseudonym of Robin Carl. It was published in 1991. It's got a great cover. This one is set a few years in the future, and the Amityville house is now sitting as a crumbling structure. This kid, he breaks in, tries to steal some stuff like old furniture or a painting or something, and he unleashes the evil forces there. This one I enjoyed as well as a horror novel. Again, complete work of fiction. Sort of branches out of just as a haunted house type of book and into something kind of different. Again, this is Amityville: The Nightmare Continues by R. Carl Largent, writing as Robin Carl. Another book that you can read right after this one is called Amityville Horror Christmas. I'm not joking. Amityville Horror Christmas. This was authored by Jones and published independently in 2018. I've never read this, but the synopsis has two handymen that visit the house in 1975 and then end up doing battle with malevolent spirits. The book to read after this one is called Hans Holzer's The Amityville Curse. Now, this was published in 1981 and is again a complete work of horror fiction. In this book, 7 friends purchase the Amityville house and they begin experiencing horror. In this book, the main reason for the house to be haunted is a long-dead Native American chief named Rolling Thunder. He's apparently got the ground cursed or something like that. The town begins to rally behind long-kept secrets regarding land and burial rites. I remember reading this when I was a kid and enjoyed it, but it's very different than what you get with like Jay Anson's book. Again, this is called The Amityville Curse by Hans Holzer. The next book in the series to read is The Secret of Amityville by Hans Holzer. This was published in paperback in 1985. It's 192 pages, probably has my favorite book cover of all the Amityville stuff. But this is kind of a really goofy book that looks at the early days of Amityville's history, its founding. There's stuff like pirates and English lords and stuff. It ties into a land tract curse and explains that the house at 112 Ocean Avenue is like a gateway into hell. Again, this is a horror novel. The book is called The Secret of Amityville by Hans Holzer. All right. Now, we talked about a lot of Amityville books here, so I just wanted to kind of read back this list to you in the suggested reading order, if that's cool. My suggested reading order, again, is start with High Hopes: The Amityville Murders by Gerard Sullivan and Harvey Aronson. Then read The Night the DeFeos Died by Rick Osuna. Then Mentally Ill in Amityville by Will Saviv. And then Murder in Amityville by Hans Holzer. Those first 4 books are all about the DeFeo murders. Next, The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, followed by The Amityville Horror Part 2 by John G. Jones, followed by Amityville: The Final Chapter, followed by Amityville: The Horror Returns. And those books are by John G. Jones, other than Amityville Horror, which was Jay Anson. Those books are all about the Lutzes as fictional characters doing battle with evil forces. From there, you're going to do Amityville: The Evil Escapes, written by John Jones, and then Amityville: The Nightmare Continues, written by R. Carl Largent as Robin Carl, and then Amityville Horror Christmas. Those books are all like furniture-based, like cursed furniture that they get from a yard sale or the handyman going into the house and getting cursed. So that kind of makes up its own little thing. And then Hans Holzer's The Amityville Curse is next, followed by The Secret of Amityville by, again, Hans Holzer. Now, I don't want any of you to be misled by a book titled Amityville Curse, Fact and Fiction by Hans Holzer. This book is simply a reprint omnibus featuring the 3 Hans Holzer's books I already mentioned. The book includes Murder in Amityville, The Amityville Curse, and The Secret of Amityville. Again, the book is called Amityville Curse, Fact and Fiction by Hans Holzer. So if you want to get all three books together in one omnibus, then that would be the one to get. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to briefly touch on the movies, and gosh, not all of them because that would take hours and hours, but the ones that actually matter. So let's talk about the movies just briefly. All right, so the first one to begin with, if you want a type of fictional story continuity, is Amityville 2 The Possession. Start with that movie. Now remember, this is the cinematic universe. It's all fiction. None of this is real. We're talking about a fictional universe of characters and alternate history. But start with this movie. It's from 1982. Again, Amityville 2 The Possession. It's loosely based on the DeFeo murders, but takes a plot borrowed from Hans Holzer's Murder in Amityville that suggests Ronald DeFeo Jr. was possessed by the devil, and that's why he went on a murder rampage. In this movie, the DeFeo family is called the Montellis. From that movie, you can then jump into the Amityville Horror from 1979. This is, of course, based on Jay Anson's book and takes a lot of liberties with the Lutz's accounts. Amityville Horror, 1979. Then you can do Amityville 3D from 1983. So that'll be your third movie. Amityville 3D from 1983. This is about a man and his daughter that move into the house after the Lutzes, and then they do battle with the evil force there. Then you can do Amityville The Evil Escaped, based on the 1988 book by John G. Jones. I think Patty Duke is in this movie. It was made for television. Amityville The Evil Escapes. Next, you're going to watch Amityville It's About Time, which was from 1992. It's about a haunted clock that was removed from the Amityville house. The clock terrorizes a family. Next, you're going to do Amityville Dollhouse from 1996. Uses the exact same plot, but to switch out a clock for a haunted dollhouse. Next, you're going to watch Amityville The Awakening from 2017. This was a decent film that actually mentions the Amityville Horror movie and book in the actual film. Then do Amityville Evil Never Dies from 2017 about a haunted toy monkey. And last, I would watch the remake of Amityville Horror from 2005, although it's kind of goofy. That's my whole feature on these Amityville paperbacks. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too far off the mark of what we normally like to do here at Paperback Warrior. But I've grown up with these books. I read them when I was a kid. I see these paperbacks occasionally in used bookstores still. They're somewhat collectible. I still see people looking for these books. And the Amityville franchise is still a booming commodity. It seems like there's a new Amityville movie every single year. So people are still drawn to this crazy story. But anyway, that's my feature. My references for the feature were all the books that I mentioned in the feature itself. I used all those as my direct source material. So everything I mentioned in the feature, all those books I used as references. So let's move on to another type of haunted house, which is going to be my final piece of this episode, which is my review. And I chose to review Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. Now, Grady Hendrix, he's got so many great books. He's an abstract type of horror writer. He wrote a book about a haunted IKEA type of store called Horror Store. That was my first experience with him. He did My Best Friend's Exorcism. Not My Best Friend's Exorcism. He's not a priest. It's the book My Best Friend's Exorcism. He has a new book out now titled Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. But today I'm reviewing his 2023 book, How to Sell a Haunted House. In this book, the main character is a woman named Louise. When her parents die in a car wreck, she's forced to resume this strenuous relationship with her estranged brother, Mark. He's kind of like a drinking handyman kind of dude. The reunion, it takes place in their parents' home in Charleston, South Carolina, where both of them spend time and energy dredging up all their tumultuous childhood memories while warring and speculating over the proposed inheritance that they're going to be getting. They're going through the house, cleaning it up, trying to get it ready to sell, getting rid of junk and things like that. But the element that makes Grady Hendrix's haunted house book scary is a puppet. That's right, a freaking puppet. It's an evil, murderous, terrifying, memorable little puppet. After discovering repressed memories, Louise must come to grips with the fact that her parents were super weirdos, and they were supernaturally gifted, or cursed, if you will, with the ability to make inanimate objects, I guess, come alive. While her parents were loving and mostly appeared normal, behind closed doors there's a lot of bizarre things happening with porcelain dolls and clown puppets, like the objects that 90% of children are deathly afraid of, dolls and puppets and clowns. The book becomes this fast-paced narrative as Louise and Mark contend with all these crazy puppet things going on and the fact that maybe their parents weren't who they really thought that they were. Hendrix isn't a stranger to funny types of horror. His novels, like The Final Girl Support Group, are bestsellers due to the unique blend of satire and clever fanboy horror. So, How to Sell a Haunted House employs all the author's horror tropes, but still's got this very personal, intimate story to share. If you want a not so traditional haunted dwelling tale, then this is the open invitation you can't decline. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix is pretty darn good. And that wraps up this episode. I hope you enjoyed this haunted house theme that I created with this one. Kind of a weird thing, but I'll be back in a couple weeks with more discussion on books, vintage fiction, authors. In the meantime, be sure to visit paperbackwarrior.com often for more written reviews and video links. As always, thanks for listening and watching. Thanks for all your support, and go enjoy whatever it is you're doing. Take care, and I'll see you next time.